Hello, I'm Jenny Foxeeds, and this is one of a series of videos about teacher wellbeing, and in particular about the use of story in promoting character strengths and virtues in education. I'm going to tell a story today that you can find in this book, Character Strengths Assemblies, and it's one of my favourites. One of the reasons I use story is that I'm not a big fan of the Katie is kind variety of story and storytelling, because I don't think that's how story works. Stories are complex. They have light and shade in them. The stories I tell are certainly stories that show character strengths in action, but they're stories that can provoke discomfort as well as comfort, and I think discomfort is also an important part of educational well-being. So the story I'm going to tell you today certainly has elements of the strengths of kindness, friendship, and friendship with creation, as well as between people, and probably love. But there are other elements in it as well. I would see gratitude in this story, certainly spirituality, because it's a story about a saint. And there's honesty in the story on the part of multiple characters. So the story I'm going to tell you is the story of St Werburga. And I'm telling it now partly because the canal near my house is full of geese and they are having goslings. So geese are on my mind, and it's a story about geese. But also because Werburga is one of my local saints. Chester Cathedral, which is not too far away, has a beautiful large stained glass window of Werburga, and whenever you see a picture of Werburga you will always see a goose next to her, and this is why. I'm going to use my hands to tell this story. Some of the things I'm going to do are British Sign Language, so that's the sign for kindness, but I'm also going to use other gestures. I discovered when I was telling this story in assembly, and it's a lovely assembly story, that if I invite children to make noises to enter into a story, they can get very excited, sometimes overexcited. If I ask them to make gestures, they listen more attentively and they enter into the story in a quieter and I think more mature way. And we're talking sort of infants when I first told this story, though I would tell it all the way through the school age range. So this is the story of St Werburga, and I call it One of My Geese is Missing. Werburga was a saint, everybody said so, and they told stories about her kindness. But Werburga said she just looked and listened and noticed the important things in life, like the children who played in her cornfield. And Werburga noticed when a toy horse was lost, and there were tears, and she stayed to help to search until the horse was found and the tears dried up. Werburga was a saint, everybody said so, and they told stories about her kindness. But Werburga said she just looked and listened and noticed the important things in life, like the birds that nested in her cornfield. And Werburga noticed when a wing was broken, and she nursed the bird until the wing was healed and the bird flew away. Werburga was a saint, everybody said so, and they told stories about her kindness. But even saints have their limits. And when Werburga noticed a flock of geese trampling down her cornfield with their great webbed feet, she was not pleased. She called a neighbour and she said, "Tell those geese they can spend the night in my barn, not trampling down my cornfield." Now, Werburga was a saint, everybody said so, and she never said very much, so when she did, people paid attention. But the neighbour looked at Werburga and thought, geese don't do as you tell them. If I tell those geese to follow me, they'll hiss at me, and they'll honk at me, and they'll wave their great long snake-like necks at me, and then they'll do exactly what they want. But Werburga was a saint, everybody said so. So the neighbour did as she asked. And though the geese did hiss and honk and wave their great long snake-like necks, they followed him all the same into Werburga's barn, where they spent the night. The next morning Werburga went to let the geese out of the barn. As they passed her, walking out of the door, Werburga noticed something. She noticed that the geese seemed to be hissing and honking more sadly than usual. She noticed that they seemed to be waving their great long snake-like necks, as if they were trying to tell her something. And then Werburga noticed that one of the geese was missing. She sent for the neighbour, who hung his head in shame. He thought no one would notice if he took one of the geese. He thought no one would notice if he killed the goose and ate it for his supper. But the geese had noticed, and so had Werburga. Werburga told the neighbour to fetch the bones of the goose that he had eaten. And then she prayed very hard, because Werburga thought geese were important, and guests were important, and ought to be noticed, and God must have thought so too, because as Werburga prayed, something very strange happened. The bones started to move. As she prayed harder, flesh began to cover the bones. As she prayed harder, feathers began to sprout out of the flesh, and soon there was a hissing, honking goose waving its great long snake-like neck, where before there had been a pile of bones. The geese bowed their heads to Werburga to thank her for noticing that one of them was missing. And then, with one last hiss, one last honk, and one last bow of their great snake-like necks, the geese took off and flew honking through the air. So when you hear geese honking overhead, remember Werburga, who looked and listened and noticed the important things in life. Thank you for listening.